an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, the book club, covering The Dead Zone by Stephen King. In this book, a dude has superpowers and can see the future and the past. He can do a lot. And yet he doesn't do that much. Welcome to Unspoiled. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Natasha.
And I'm Alan. Hello.
Hi, Alan's back. I haven't recorded with Alan since the end of Justified, you guys. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been almost a year.
I was thinking that it was like going on a year at this point. Yeah.
It's November. Yeah. Yeah,
God,
it's been a long
crazy time. So this book you jumped on when I posted that I was going to be covering this for the book club in the co-host group. You had read this before. What made you eager to cover this with me?
I read this book. I probably read this book 5 or 6 times.
Oh wow!
I picked up this
okay.
book. Yeah, I've read this book. I picked it up sight unseen from a used bookstore when I was in my late teens, just because it was a Stephen King novel and I hadn't read it and I hadn't even heard of it. And I found myself absolutely fascinated by not just the premise, what do you get hit in the head and you wake up with superpowers? Okay, that's cool. But I loved the sort of the question of well, first the idea that your life really sucks if this is a thing that you can do. And then the sort of central conceit of, if you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you do it? And you wouldn't be known as the guy who killed Hitler. You'd be known as the crazy person who assassinated a small-time politician. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be so captivating. And I've gone back and read it a bunch of times, like I said. And this is one of those books. Normally, when we did Winter's Bone last year, I read the book twice and still had to go keep a detailed list of what happened in that book just to remind myself so we could go over the plot in a way that would make sense to me. And right from the first time I read it, I just remembered the sequence of this book so well and the big events in this book so well that it always stuck out in my mind as one of the books of his that really moved and really grabbed my attention, which was interesting reading it this time because I actually had some different thoughts on it when I actually sat down to think about it. And I don't know, going through it this time was different for me a little bit. But I just still really like it. And I love the movie that they did. I love the TV series they made of it. Something about this premise just really, just really speaks to me. And I just love all the different things they do with it. And I also really like Depresso Stephen King. I don't know if I know why that is exactly, but he wrote a bunch of these books in the late 70s and the early 80s that are they're just so, everybody sucks in them. And nothing good happens. And it all ends terribly. So something about that really spoke to me. And then when we were doing this, and of course all the stuff with Gregg Stilson and the current political climate, and it's not exactly a one-to-one analogy, but, the entire 2016 election cycle, I'm thinking hot dog party in my head. And so it just, I don't know, it seemed like something I wanted to talk about. So here I
am. Well, thank you for being here, sir.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I have a lot of sort of conflicting feelings about this book, and I like that you mentioned Depresso King because I was saying to Owen that I have been liking that era of his work better as well and feel shitty about it. I'm complicit somehow in his addiction and misery by being no, that was some of your best work. But this book is one where I went back and forth from time to time feeling I'm really fascinated by all of what's happening, all the little details. And then I would go to, I don't really need to know all of this. And you're taking way too long to get where I want to go here.
That's reasonable.
And I still haven't totally decided if I fall in that second category firmly or not. I went through phases as the book continued. And so, yeah, and then obviously, like, once I realized where we were heading for all of this, because you get introduced to a few different character POVs without any indication of how they could possibly be tied together. And they don't really get tied together until the last third of the book, probably. So in that sense, I was very interested because I wanted to know how this all wrapped up.
Sure.
But yeah, so all right, so let's start things off. Okay. Oh, hi, Tony. Tony's here. No dead animals? Alan.
Oh, he was asking if there's a dead dog or cat. Am I forgetting a dead animal?
There is a dog that gets kicked to death in one of the first
chapters. Oh my
chapters.
God, of course,
yeah.
That dead animal. Yeah, okay, right, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
Which is why I came on the Facebook group and was just like, oh yeah, a dead dog. Here we go, dog murder. It's King's favorite thing.
Yeah.
I remember reading or seeing an interview or something with him where he was talking about an old lady who wrote him a letter and just was like, you really didn't need to include that dog getting killed in your book. And he was like, yeah, I did. The guy's a psycho evil bastard. That's yes. And I'm like, all right, listen, I don't disagree with your assessment, but also maybe just don't do it all the time is all I'm saying, King. But
he's got a couple of go-tos. He likes that and he likes child porn. As like, if I really want to just establish this guy's bad, those tend to be his two go-tos.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't believe I blanked on the dead dog. That's right. That's our introduction to Gregg.
Yep.
So yeah, when the book... Oh, go ahead.
No. Please take the lead here. I'll follow.
All right. So yeah, we get 3 introductions more or less at the start of the book. We get Johnny Smith at 5 years old. And we get this accident, which I thought was a really interesting setup that, I don't know, something about that. It's so short, and it doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the book, except it kind of does.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. How did you feel about that as just an introduction to the world and to the character?
I liked it because you just get a little bit of a taste of what's coming because he doesn't know what he's saying or doing at the time. So he predicts that this battery is going to explode in this dude's face, but doesn't realize what he's saying, doesn't remember it at all afterwards, which I found really interesting, that's something that it feels initially when he's an adult and this starts to happen again. He'll come out of this like haze and not remember, but then he starts to remember and starts to realize what's happening. And I like the setup of, because, you know, King loves linking childhood trauma to people's present personalities. And this was a really interesting, different way of him doing that, where he's like, no, it wasn't abuse. It wasn't trauma that, like, you know, scarred him for life. He literally forgot about it. He doesn't even, like, when they bring it up later that there's a fracture on your skull that mended, he's just like, I don't think so. Nope, pretty sure that never happened. So it was just a very different way of doing that I found interesting. Yeah.
And then we meet our antagonist, who we don't necessarily know is the antagonist for the rest of the book. I mean, we sort of get an idea. But we meet Gregg Stilson selling Bibles and other conspiracy theory things out of the trunk of his car. And this is him kicking the dog to death that I totally blanked on. And I find Gregg Stilson...
It is a drawn-out scene. Oh, it's rough. Because I did the audiobook, so there was no, like, speed reading or just, like, skipping ahead to when the dog... Like, I just had to sit there because I was driving and just be like, oh, my God. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, so you did the audiobook. Did you do the James Franco version of the audiobook?
I did.
And you did not see The Disaster Artist, right?
I didn't, but I definitely noticed what you're talking about.
Yes, his voice for his doctor friend is absolutely his Tommy Wiseau voice from The Room.
Yup. I couldn't figure it out. I was listening and I was like, why does this sound so familiar? What is he doing? And then I realized it, and I was like, oh my God. And I picked Owen up from work, and I had it, and I was like, babe, hold on. Just listen to this for a second. And he's like, is he really doing that? I was like, he sure is. All right, I'll allow it.
And that's all that goes in my head now for the entire rest of the book. Anytime that character pops up, absolutely. Long, black, greasy hair, sunglasses, 3 belts around his waist.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So, anyway, back to Gregg Stilson and kicking dogs. It's terrible. It's long. And it is... I think Gregg Stilson is one of my least favorite characters, in a good way, in everything Stephen King's ever written. He feels to me like so many people that I'm pretty sure I know. If I could just get a peek behind the curtain, I feel like I've met this guy a couple different times. Mm-hmm. And right from the dichotomy, I guess, of the Bible salesman who really doesn't care very much what he's selling, mm-hmm. but wants to get ahead and be the best and have all this repressed rage. Not so repressed rage.
Yeah, it's like, it's rage that comes out in little spurts. I keep hearing this. Is there a car driving by outside?
No,
sorry, there's like this weird hollow like sound that sounds like it's like passing by the speakers. I'm sorry, it might just be me. But yeah, this it's a weird combo of like rage and also low key. There's like a clear mental issue because he like seems to almost black out. Not really, but what do they call it? Disassociate?
Yeah, there's a psychosis
moments
there
of violence.
Some kind. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, Sal is saying it's the first time I've heard him read a novel, and he does a wonderful job with it with James Franco. I was really pleasantly surprised, to be honest. Like, once I realized that he was doing that voice, thankfully I already had a picture in my head of this doctor, so he did not turn into Tommy Wiseau. But there were a couple different moments where he did certain voices that I was like impressed with. You know, I had no idea it was James Franco. So when I started playing it, this is Audible, The Dead Zone by Stephen King, narrated by James Franco. And I'm like, what? And then he goes, dedicated to Owen. And I'm like, what? But yeah, I thought he did a surprisingly good job with it. It's better than like the one that I listened to for The Bag of Bones was narrated by Stephen King, and that was no good. Oh, yeah. Stephen King shouldn't do that.
He's all up in his nose, and yeah, I've never been a fan of the stuff he's narrated himself. But I agree. Yeah. I thought James Franco did a great job. He's a weird guy who looks at the world in a weird way, and this is a book full of weird characters, so it makes total sense. Mm-hmm. And in the movie, I forget I can't think of the director of the movie, but Johnny Smith is Christopher Walken, who again does a great job of being a consummate weirdo. So with that little bit of a dark side to him, which Franco has also. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I really think really well.
I'm interested in seeing the movie because I've heard it's really good. I didn't even know that there was like a miniseries until I was checking the Wikipedia for the book after I finished it, and I saw them mention that, and I was like, "Oh, really?" And I guess there's enough story here to do a miniseries, but I feel like it would work better as a movie.
No, they did it.
What do you prefer?
Well, actually, it wasn't a miniseries; it was a 5-season TV show.
5 seasons? Okay, no.
Yes, it was 5. And well, this is the thing: they change a couple of things. First of all, Johnny and Sarah are a couple, like a couple before the accident. He wakes up 5 years later and finds out that she has a son who is presumed to be his. Rather than being married to some like 1980s empty suit, she's married to the sheriff who Johnny pairs up with to find the murderer.
Oh, okay.
And rather than Johnny becoming a total recluse who gets, shutters himself away from the world, he actually makes friends, and he almost opens up like a detective agency. And so every episode, and it's not really a detective agency, but people who send him things, he will actually try and go and do good in the world.
Okay.
And then there is this running antagonist of Greg Stilson, who's sort of building in the background, and they occasionally, at the end of the first season, they cross paths for the first time, and that whole story starts brewing. The show I found to be incredibly watchable. I'm not going to say it's fantastic TV, but it's one of those shows where I'd sit down and watch 4 or 5 episodes at a clip, because I just enjoyed the hell out of it.
Yeah, like now when you're saying it, like the some of the changes regarding like the specific characters that we know, I'm not like invested enough to really care that they made those changes. I'm like, all right, yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that they had him actually using his gift more actively, I'm totally here for that, because that's the thing that I found most frustrating about the book is how resistant he is to that. And I get that it would be exhausting, and I get that it would, but like there does come a point that I found it frustrating how little his conscience pricks at him about the things that he could be helping with and preventing and solving. So, all right. Well, let's talk about the actual plot, because we keep not doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, the book starts. We meet Johnny as a little kid. We meet Greg Stilson selling Bibles. We also meet the murderer that we don't hear very much about for a really long time afterwards, but we get in his head for his first kill. We then fast forward to Johnny and Sarah and like their third date going to the fair. And we learn a little bit about Sarah and a little bit about John Smith and this life he has set up for himself, where he is apparently a pretty kick-ass high school teacher. And he's just starting out, but the kids really like him. He's the cool teacher in the building. He gets through to the kids who sit in the back of the class and goof off everywhere else. And he is just starting to see this beautiful woman who he really clicks with and really sees a future with. And then everything goes horribly wrong. And that's the last bit of happiness you really get in the book for the next 300 pages.
Yeah, that is true, isn't it?
Now, the scene at the fair is honestly one of my favorites. I really, really like the scene at the Wheel of Fortune, where he keeps guessing correctly and guessing correctly and guessing correctly.
Yeah, it's really well written. I think, oh, you know what? I know what that sound is. I'm hearing myself coming through your mic somehow.
Oh.
Because that weird sound doesn't happen until I start talking.
Well, I just adjusted the volume of the audio, so I'm hoping that maybe...
Yeah, I think that's better. All right,
okay.
Cool. We're good.
All right, excellent.
So, yeah, that scene, there's something really... The tension there, I really like that King decides to implement something interesting about this ability that Johnny has, which is the fact that he almost seems to be a different person for a moment when he's in that state. And that was something I found really interesting, was how threatening he seems to her. Like the look that he gets on his face, and he's like, when he realizes that she's feeling sick, because the thing is that she's got a like food poisoning or something from eating a bad hot dog, which I really thought in the moment wasn't really what it was, that she was thinking it was food poisoning, but that it was a result of being upset by him somehow.
Right.
Which maybe still could be true, but yeah, the having him sort of be like alien for a moment is an interesting thing to do, so that people can see, even if they don't know what's happening, that there's something strange going on with him in that moment, and he looks like suddenly totally unfamiliar to them. So I liked that choice, and the fact that like this crowd gathers and the way everything kind of accelerates until she winds up going and throwing up finally. And he had been so concerned that she was sick and like, oh, we should really go. But then that comes over him again, and he's just like, well, hold on a second. Let me just try one more. While she's literally vomiting and like about to collapse over here, you know?
Yeah, I love the way that the tension builds, because the scene doesn't start out tense at all. Mm-hmm. And he manages to ramp it up as it keeps going. And yeah, I love that fact that he doesn't just have these things happen to him. He changes in a way where he wants to know more. He almost needs to know more. And I think that does a lot with the... I guess it's just exactly what you said, just the way that it sets him apart from everybody else and really kind of turns him very cold and very calculating and very alien. And I think the book never says it, but it does play with the idea that there's a karmic thing that's happening with these powers as well. I feel like there's echoes of it a couple times of any good thing he does seems to have some kind of a negative echo. It doesn't directly draw that, but I feel like there are echoes of it throughout the book. And they kind of get set.
I didn't really notice that, but yeah, we can talk about that as we go because I'm curious about that. Because he gets all of this money from this playing this successfully. He gets like $800 in the end, I think.
It's something crazy like that, yeah. Especially this is 1979 or 1960 something or whatever. You know, it's back then. That's even more money than it is now.
Yeah, I think she says something like that's like almost a month's wages for him from what he would be getting at school.
Right.
But yeah, and then he is like thinking about what his mother used to say, and that found money brings bad luck. And he keeps it's like burrowed into his mind when it occurs to him that she used to say that. And he keeps on thinking it right up until the moment that the cab he's in gets hit. The cabbie, bless his heart, talking about how he has only ever had like one accident ever. And then 4 seconds later is dead. That's a brutal scene.
It really is. And like you said, I think the fact that this was the first time I'd listened to it on audio, some of these scenes that really go on, I feel like when I'd read the book in the past, I kind of skimmed past it. I got the gist, and I see how horrible it is, and that registers in my brain. So the rest of it, the details don't necessarily matter. Let's go. And they really let you linger several times in this book, and that accident's one of them. And then Johnny drops out of the story for a long time.
Yeah. And
I don't think I remembered quite how long it was until I reread it again this time, and again had to listen to it. And we go and
this
see
was one of the
else.
sections I kind of have mixed feelings on. Part of me appreciates that he took the time to really illustrate the passage of time and all the changes that happen with everybody, and how 4 years doesn't sound like a long time, but how different things can be. And I'm kind of back and forth on this. I have to say I really liked the scene where what is her name? The girl that he's into? Sarah. When she gets the call from her friend who works at the school, who knows that he's been in an accident and thinks that Sarah knows already, and then realizes that's a really good moment, as well as her meeting his mother in the hospital for the first time.
Yeah, she's an interesting character.
Listen, I think you all know, if you've listened to Unspoiled, what I'm about to say. But this woman is what my dad just missed being.
Oh, right.
Really, he managed to escape, I think, because he got kicked out of his crazy church and married a sane woman who kind of gently was like, honey, that's insanity. Stop. And God bless her. But the description of her being devout initially in a way that was uncomfortable, but kind of endearing, and that's her thing and it's fine, to sliding into more and more crazy conspiracy theories, her books that she had been reading about Bible study getting shoved off to the side in favor of weird self-published stuff that begins to take up more and more room. The tracts and strange magazines that are full of typos and all of this bizarre artwork, and the strangeness and of all of the different theories that every single one, she thinks this is the one now. 100% the direction that he was going in. I mean, the stuff that he believed did not even seem like it should be part of Christianity. How does this even go together? How are you conflating these things? It was straight up superstition and a borderline paranoid disorder. And yet they really apparently go together a lot, because there were plenty of people that were going to the church that he went to and publishing the books that he was buying, you know? So that whole like description of how she begins to cling harder and harder and become more and more irresponsible too. Like that was one of the big fights I remember my parents having, was my father started to tithe to this church, and like half of his paycheck was going to the church with, you know, and just all of this stuff about, feeling like if you're not giving up your money, then you're not faithful. Like that's proof that you aren't committed to this. It was just really hard to read at some points because there is no reasoning with somebody who's in that headspace. And his father is so devoted to her, despite like he fantasizes about running away, but it's never a serious thing in the least. It's just this momentary, like, I wish I could, but this is my wife. And it was tough.
And we have some family stuff, Amanda and I, where there are those relationships of, you know, this person has gone off the deep end for one reason or another. That they have left the planet Earth, but I am their spouse, and that is so I'm sticking by my spouse, and to the point where it hurts. And that part of the book hurts to read. Yeah, it does wonders to establish the world for when Johnny eventually wakes up. But just seeing the kind of havoc that this wreaks on the lives of everyone around him, his parents most of all, of course, is so well illustrated. But again, it's just the start of this snowballing sadness that really never lets up. And you know, and we see Sarah as well. I thought that was really interesting to see her move along too. I was actually kind of curious for your perspective on Sarah, because she meets this guy. She has a couple of dates. They're really good. They really seem to have a connection. And he doesn't die, but he, you know, is in a coma for 4 years, and she moves on with her life and finds somebody else, but always is kind of wondering what if, because as much as she loves her husband, there's someone in the past. And on one hand, I think it's really well done. On the other hand, I do feel like it's a little bit of a cliche. I was curious how you felt about that.
Yeah, this was something I was actually talking with a friend of mine the other day about how, if you've like been dating and you've been going through the ups and downs of romance, you learn eventually that one of the hardest things to deal with isn't a relationship that just didn't work out. It's a relationship that never got a chance. Those are the ones that fuck with you the most, I think. Okay. And they feel so unfair. And also there is this like constant low level, not even really, there's almost a low level hope that, well, it hasn't worked out, but who knows? Who knows? And you kind of operate on who knows until you like get over it eventually, or don't. And so I kind of liked this because it was, there's been people in my life that I was like sort of into, and the fact that we never even had the opportunity to really pursue it was, I think, like messed my head up much worse than a flat out breakup would have. It was just a circumstantial thing. And that's out of anyone's control in a lot of cases. And so if you are able to give it a shot and you've established, yeah, you know what, we just don't work out together, the question is answered. And you've got closure there. And it's frustrating maybe and painful maybe, but still. So this really seemed like actual hell to me. The idea of meeting somebody that you are really into, like she's debating it, and that night together she kind of cements it for her that she says I love you back to him, and it sends him like he's like floating on air by the time he walks out of her apartment. So, and then it being something that's so uncertain, like you go into a coma, people do come out of them, people get put into them to like keep them safe, and then are brought out of them, like that kind of thing. So I can totally understand sort of waiting around. And also I like that he addresses the strangeness of the bond between her and his parents, because they go through this horrific thing together at the hospital and connect on this. But then she starts to have to move on with her life, and she feels weird about it. But his father, who's the one that she's really in contact with, she doesn't talk to the mother. His father understands that and like senses that, okay, it's time. I think we're all kind of trying to move on except for his mom. So I thought that was the part that, like, when I say that I felt like he went a little too deep with what went on while Johnny was asleep. At the same time, I appreciated seeing what this was like for her, because it's one of those, like, she's so young when this happens. What are they, like 23?
Something like that,
when
yeah.
This,
yeah.
I mean, that's like going to be one of your first experiences as an adult with how deeply unfair the world is. Just doesn't care. World doesn't care. It's going to fuck you up and you're just going to have to figure it out. And her realizing that dating Johnny kind of got her out of what could have been a cycle of just dating bad men.
Right.
Which I found kind of interesting. And it's one of those things that I'm not entirely trusting King to get right, because he does like to write victim women as a default a lot of the time, I find. So when he started down the path of describing Dan, who's the first guy that she's dating, I was concerned that he was going to start getting a little too, but he does it. He skirts just around and is like, oh, it could have been a super abusive relationship. Thankfully, it didn't get there. She didn't stick with him that long, and Dan was at least self-aware enough to be like, oh no, we're not going to continue this. But that was a sort of realization on her part that maybe, like, being treated well and seeing how good that can be changed the course of how she approached romance.
Sure.
Which I could see that happening. You know, it's a real, like, I have seen a lot of people, not just women, but people think that, like, being in relationships and having drama and conflict are just meant to go together. And that's just not true. It's really not. But if you haven't experienced anything else, you don't really believe that any other option is out there.
Yeah.
So,
when Amanda and I first started going out, probably about 4 or 5 months into the relationship, I started trying to push us into a fight because I wanted us to have a big blowout fight, because I knew it would have to happen eventually, so let's just get it over with. To the point where we did actually end up having a fight because you're like, will you please stop? And it was, it really, I came real close just to try to provoke a fight for the sake of it, because I assumed that was just going to be part of this, so let's get it out of the way. And and I'm an idiot, it turns out. Who knew? But I do like that idea of Johnny being the one who kind of pushes her back on the path towards, like, hey, no, the healthy relationships are out there. Because I do think one of the big themes of this book are just the ripples that people, make, and how one thing leads to the next, leads to the next, and then falling dominoes and whatnot. So I think that actually makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I wasn't sure. I guess the other thought I had in this section, again, having read the book several times, that this was the first time I was reading this going, they're spending a lot of time on this. Wow. This book has really taken its time in this place. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
And then this is also the first time I read the book since I watched the TV show, which has been off the air for a couple of years. And in the show, Sarah is a huge character. She does a lot, because Johnny is like best friends with her sheriff husband, and they're sort of the triangle thing. And there's a lot that's going on here. And I forget, after spending this much time with her, I'm prepared for her to be a very big part of this book. And she really isn't. She's a recurring touchstone. But, in this is the most exposure we get to her for, really for the rest of the book. There's only 1 or 2 more big scenes that she has a lot to do with. But it does do such a good job of painting a picture, like I said, of the ripples and of the how the world changes while Johnny is asleep, and what's going to wait for him when he does finally wake up.
Yeah, I think that, like, while I do like the parts that include her, and I like seeing how things unfolded with his parents, I do think we've reached a point where we get it. And he just kind of hammers it home too much. And that's something that I think is King's weakness, is that he includes so much more than the reader really needs to understand what he's trying to illustrate. And it's like, okay, maybe you need to know this as an author, and this can be your notes, but you don't need us to know this. And, like, just but edit, like, he doesn't get edited. And it's weird because this is an early work of his. This isn't like, late Dark Tower stuff
Right.
where apparently he just had carte blanche to do whatever. But yeah, I agree. I think that went on for too long is really, so it's not the content that I have a problem with. It's that it gets repetitive.
Yeah.
And doesn't really tell us anything new.
Well, and that was overall something about this read through of the book. The big thing that struck me was I remember this book just moving. And like, no, it has a lot of big moments, but it spends a lot of time on each of those moments to the point where it kind of meanders until it finds a plot 200 pages in.
Yeah.
And I never got that feeling from the book when I read it before. So I don't know what changed in me. Maybe just having to sit there and listen to it. But I do love the section. But this is the first time where I just suddenly realized, like, they're taking a while.
Yeah, I think it's really remarkable that people will write off audiobooks as if it's not really reading. When I find audiobooks at times forces me to notice things that I would otherwise really skim. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I can totally understand how, like, without having done an audiobook before, this time you're like, oh, this is still happening. Okay, I guess we're here now. And when you said, like, until it finds a plot, I think that's a good way to say that, because it starts off with this really action, like, oh, he can see the numbers that are coming, and then he gets hit and he's in a coma, and this is all like really front loaded. And so I got really drawn in immediately as I was listening. I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. And then we hit this long dead spot, the dead zone, which I started to be like, I'm not even sure where he's going with this now. Like, I thought I knew what this book was going to be about in a way, and I guess not. What is this? And eventually it does turn into kind of what I expected, but it just takes so long to get there. And that was a similar thing with Bag of Bones, that the whole front half of the book, I was like, you could have chopped almost all of that. I don't quite feel that about this. That's not, you know, Bag of Bones was really kind of egregious in that respect. But
well, and this might have been my first exposure to that tendency of King's, and that in addition to me never really having seen this plot done in this way. When I read it for the first time, I think I was just so interested, like, where is he going with this? Because this could literally go anywhere. And, you know, eventually it goes places, but it just doesn't seem to, again, it just seems directionless. And I think I used to find that really enticing in a book, because that's a compelling premise with an interesting character, despite it being named John Smith. And that's something the book almost never addresses. Nobody seems surprised by the fact that his name is John Smith. But whatever.
There's a couple moments, like when he buys that shotgun, and the guy is like, oh, okay, I guess we're just not even putting an effort into our aliases anymore. Like, there's a few small moments, but I wish that there had been a moment of Sarah just being to his parents like, so what was that about? What were you thinking with that? Because but yeah.
Okay, so Johnny wakes up eventually, and his first indication that something is wrong is no one will tell him how long he's been asleep. He's got no cards, no get well letters, no balloons, and the doctor's writing with a pen he has never seen before, which turns out to be a flare pen that was invented in the meantime. And then we go through the long process of his recovery, which again, I kind of forgot how much pain he's in all the time, which was, again, excruciatingly described. And I love him catching up during this period, too. It felt a lot like in the Dark Tower, you know, Eddie telling Susanna about stuff that happens in the intervening 15 years or whatever, and her just being like, no, that's ridiculous. But no, that's what happened.
I was thinking of Cap with waking up out of the ice, and just I understood that reference.
But yeah, it's interesting seeing him get reacclimated to the world, and that he has this power, and people, you know, I love seeing the initial reactions to it. The reporter who, you know, freaks out and doesn't even know how to conceive the world now, and the doctor who just straight up disbelieves no matter what. And then the doctor who takes it and says, there's clearly something here, so let's sit down and figure this out and actually be really calm and rational about it. Which is a convenient response, I think.
Right.
And his own response to it is really interesting as well, because, again, he almost takes it in stride, I feel like, to a certain degree.
Yeah, I guess I see what you mean. Like, because when it first happens, well, I guess the very first one, it's the nurse that touches his head to like move him, and he can tell that her kid had an injury and that it's gonna, but he doesn't immediately remember that he even did that until later, and they're talking about, and he's like, oh yeah, the eye surgery, and he like starts to. So, but then, there's another moment, and he'll, like, say something, and they're like, really? What are you talking about? And he's like, I don't know what the big deal is. I said what I said. And I was like, you don't know. Why are you acting like this? This is insanity. Like, and I don't know if that's supposed to be part of his coldness that comes over him, but it did seem weirdly unnatural.
Yeah, I feel like in his head, when this happens, this is a fact. You know, he's not making this up. He knows that this is a fact the same way that you have 10 fingers. So pretending like it's not true isn't doing him any good. But he does seem weirdly unsympathetic to people who don't believe him. Because it is ridiculous that would be the way. And I guess eventually he gets there, but that almost happens off page. Like eventually he just gets to be really annoyed at everybody and doesn't want to even deal with it anymore. But I really do like the council in the first place. Like, hey, you can do this amazing thing, and you even did it in front of reporters. But let's not even go there, which isn't interesting in terms of making the plot move along. But it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I understood him like not really wanting to like do the publicity or things like people sending in items and asking him to touch them and figure things out for it. Like, I really get that, because who wants a bunch of creeps mailing you stuff and then you get to like find out potentially really awful details
woman's
of
brother
their
goes
lives.
off in the woods to go pee and gets lost and drowns in quicksand. It's just like, who needs that in their life?
That was pretty rough. Yeah. But then there are things like the fact that he doesn't, I understand his position here, but when the sheriff calls him for help, and he's so mad at the doctor, whose name is Sam, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And because the doctor got in touch with the sheriff and suggested that he ask him for help, the sheriff laughed in his face. So Sam assumed he'd never call John, and just never tells John, I mentioned you to this guy. So when John does finally get the call because the sheriff's at his wit's end, he is so mad at Sam. I totally agree with him on that. Like, that was not cool. And I appreciate how contrite Sam is about it. But I did kind of want to be like, dude, there are women being strangled and raped out there, and you have no interest in helping at all? What is the matter with you? Like, it made me question whether there are people out there with abilities that just straight up just can't be bothered. And that would be so much worse than anything. Even just like, you see the typical, I am afraid of my power and so I don't want to use it, or I'm not in control of it and I haven't learned how to manage it, so it's just kind of but this is different. This is like, he does have a little bit of control over it. And I just was judging him.
I think judging him is fair. I don't think that it's because he can't be bothered. I do think it's because he's, I think he feels like, I think he's just being very insular and very selfish. I think he feels like the world just screwed me. I had a great girl, I had a great job, I had a great life, and the world has screwed me up when I came out doing this thing that I can't control, and people flip out and, accuse me of lying every time I use it. So you know what? Screw it. I'm not going to sit there and be angry at everybody, but at the same time, I'm not interested. And my doctor buddy says that's okay. And so, then I think he feels like it's a violation of that. But truly, he's being totally insular and totally selfish about it. And actually, on the topic of the TV show, there's an episode of the TV show where they end up in a parallel universe. I don't even remember the details exactly, but essentially they go to the universe of the book of John Smith being insular and selfish and crazy conspiracy theory guy, specifically to say to the audience, that is not our TV show, and this story is not going to end that way because this is not the same John Smith. Because I wouldn't want to watch a TV show about that guy.
Nice.
And yeah, and so again, I think reading the book this time, I was surprised at what a quiet character he was, because the show portrayed him so differently, and I watched that show for 5 seasons. But yeah, I really think that's what it is for me.
You can't believe it was that long, and I have never heard of it.
And it's not going to win awards, but it was solid TV, and they were going up to the 6th season was supposed to be their final one, and it got canceled, and that makes me really sad because they were headed for whatever their big ending was going to be, and we never get to know.
Yeah, that's annoying. Like, you just one season left. Come on, guys.
And Anthony Michael Hall is John Smith in the show, and he, like, what a cool opportunity for him, because the way they do the visions, sometimes he's on, he's a bystander looking at things. Sometimes he is portraying the person.
Wait, it's Dexter?
No. Anthony Michael Hall was the nerd in the Breakfast Club. You're thinking, of... Yes.
Michael C. Hall?
Yeah.
Is that his name? Okay. The nerd in the Breakfast Club.
He is.
He's
John
Smith?
He's like 40. Yes.
What?
And he's great. He's really good.
Okay.
But sometimes he is on the outside looking in. Sometimes he's portraying the person that he is, that he's doing that's doing the action. It just gives this amazing opportunity for an actor to be in all of these places and do all these little vignettes, and he's really, really good in it. Well, I guess, and again, he's such a different character though than the character that's in the book, which is, again, coming back to the book now, really surprised me that he can be so cold and so selfish. And it's also, though, totally understandable, but maybe why the book doesn't move quite as quickly as it could. And Jesse pointed out in the chat, he also hates the way he looks because he's covered in stitches and scars. So,
he hates the way he's looked at, like a freak show every time. Even by the people who insist he uses his powers, like the reporter. Yeah, that one killed me, and it's like complete human nature. So I'm not like criticizing King's writing here, but like somebody coming up to you and being like, do the thing, and then you fucking do the thing, and they're like, you suck, go to hell, and it's like, come on, what do you want?
I also love, he comes out and his mother feels vindicated by this, because his father, who is like the stable one in the family now, has been just praying for John to die, and his mother feels like, yes, I brought you back, and God has brought you back, and you're going to do amazing things, and you need to, go out in the world. But his mother's also bad shit. So I love that relationship. I'm also happy that but she died shortly thereafter, and I'm okay with that.
Same. I did like, though, that even though she is crazy, when she says, like, don't hide yourself away, do your duty, that circles in his mind all the time, over and over again, and kind of is what pushes him to finally start doing something to help people. Which, that's another thing King is a big fan of, is somebody constantly thinking the same line over and over again. It's like sort of mantra, which is effective. I think that is how our minds tend to work.
So, he eventually comes home. He becomes a recluse. People send him packages. He turns them down. He gets a job offer from the National Enquirer to go and just for them to use his image so they can make up stories. That's a great scene of him just getting so angry at this guy who is completely missing the feeling in the air.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of clues there, Guy, from the way he's talking to you that maybe you should just... But yeah, he's just like, well, people could send you stuff. They'll send you jewelry. They'll send you... And you just keep it, whatever. Little bonuses for you. A little gravy for your potatoes
right.
is what he keeps saying. So I was just like, I hate
and
you.
I do love, there's
so
like
much.
and this book was 1979. I thought it was the early 80s. It's actually the late 70s. But there is like this through line of that sort of 80s mentality of, you know, gimme, 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 that I really love, because he doesn't hammer it there, but there is like this world of like, this is the way the world is. And you need to deal with that.
Right.
That, I don't know. I just, between that and Sarah's husband, I love that really selfish way that everyone looks at everything.
Yeah. And I like too that, like, you know, the way that King presents her husband talking about Johnny, because he's like, oh, good for him. He's using this whole like psychic gimmick thing to pay his bills. Like, I totally fucking respect that. That's a smart move. The guy has bills to pay. Right. What are you going to do? And I like that he presents it in this matter of fact. There's not a lot of judgment towards the husband. He's not being like, this is a bad guy. He does have Sarah being mad at him on Johnny's behalf because she's like feeling protective and she knows Johnny would never lie about this stuff. But if I were watching this from afar, I would assume the exact thing that her husband's assuming, that it's all, he's like capitalizing on this opportunity because American healthcare is garbage and I owe $350,000, you know, like, yeah. So yeah, I appreciated all of these perspectives that come up that I think feel very based in human nature. And there is like that, there is something though that I was annoyed by, which is the fact that Johnny is so excited to go back to teaching. And then the board is just like, yeah, we're not going to have this weirdo as our teacher for our kids, which
seems right.
But, oh, it's heartbreaking to read because it's the only thing that Johnny really had to look forward to, you know? And that's sort of what sets him into this like downward spiral for a while, is just not really knowing what to do with himself. He works as a line cook for a minute, and then he finally gets that job as a tutor for this young kid who has a reading block. And
I find that to be a really fun part of the book. I really like, because you see him, and I said there's not a lot of happiness in this book, but that's not true. That whole section of the book, you see John Smith being him at his best. He's being the best version of himself in that setting. I did think it was kind of funny because the kid was apparently reading Jude the Obscure for fun after he finishes his first books. And I've read Jude the Obscure. It's a fantastic novel. But I'm sorry, there's not a 17-year-old on this planet who is going to read Jude the Obscure for fun. Because it is an old, depressing... I had to read it in college as part of British literature. Thomas Hardy, the guy who wrote Tess of the D'Urbervilles, was his other big novel. It was labeled Jude the Obscene. It was banned. It was struck down by the church as being a book that you're, you know, as a book that was going to drive people to sin. It is about this guy who has all of his hopes and dreams crushed primarily by deceitful women and dies lonely and alone and upset and never having accomplished anything. When I was in my 20s, I read it and I was so, I listed it as like one of the books that changed my life. It meant that much to me. And now I'm actually in the process, coincidentally, of rereading it along with a podcast called Obscure. And I'm looking at it again, just going like, I don't really know about this. But I don't know. It struck me like, really, Jude the Obscure. That's what you go for, Stephen King? Because that book, man, I will tell you, is not it's not a beach read, and it's not something that you should be shoving in the hands of people. Anyway. But yeah, I really do like that part of the book, and I do like he eventually gets to be... You get to see the person that Johnny could have been, and how good he is with this kid.
Right.
Who has no interest in reading.
Yeah. Chuck is just... I really like how he's drawn, because he's Mr. Popular, like captain of the soccer team, captain of the football team, and has everything going for him, and yet manages to not be a complete douchebag, which they do exist. Like, I have known people like that. And yet this block that he has with reading, and this is something that I I find to be so difficult to like imagine how you would get around this, and the way that he decides to find like a way to sidestep it was very smart. This kid is convinced he can't do it, and so he focuses so hard, but at the same time is so sure he won't be able to, that it's sort of self-fulfilling. And I mean, have you ever gone through this with something that you wanted so bad to succeed, and that was what ruined it?
Definitely.
Like, yeah, it's so painful. Like, I mean, the one that I always go to is that bakery job that I got fired from because I just fucked up endlessly. And it was just, you know, I would pray every day before I went in that please let today not be a shit show. And no, it was. They were always a shit show. And it was just that paranoia going into it, that gut fluttering of just like,
my first interview for a
I
teaching
can't
job
do it.
was exactly that. I wanted so badly for this job. I had applied for about 40 jobs and did not get anything that summer. And I finally got one, and I came in and I bombed it so badly because I could not get I could not remove my tongue from the back of my throat. I couldn't find my notes. All the stuff I brought to show that, to show them demonstrations of things that I did, all of it was just, it all went to hell because I could not keep my head in the game. And for this kid, I spent $20,000 on a master's degree and I couldn't get a job with it. But I also like in this kid, he has this father who he so desperately wants to impress, and the dad doesn't even know. And I love that dynamic they set up. But again, no one's being an asshole here. The father isn't being like an overbearing 80s stereotype. He is, he just wants the best for his son, and his son wants to so badly to be like his dad, and the dad can't even see it. And it just creates this whole other level to why that he wants so badly this kid whose life goes right in every other way except this. And that's the thing that he can't, And he's also not wrong. They mentioned at one point, if you can't read in this world, you're screwed. That sets you back in so many ways.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I really like the fact that there's that conversation between John and Chuck's father, and John tells his dad, this is how he feels about you. He cares and really wants to do well. And like his father hears what John has to say, and he doesn't get defensive. He doesn't say like, well, how the fuck do you even know this? You're full of shit. This kid isn't even trying. Like, yeah, he's a reasonable human being who loves his son and is trying to like understand him better, and is actually hearing what is being told to him from someone who spends a lot of time with his kid. That's valuable input, Whenever there's characters who are reasonable, I'm always happy about it. Not that I expect that all the time, because then where do plots go? And that's kind of where it winds up, because Chuck manages to graduate, which they're not even sure he's going to be able to manage at first. And then once John teaches him how to sort of think about something else, and all of a sudden you'll find yourself like reading without having to put so much pressure on yourself. He graduates, and there's a lot of pressure taken off him because they agree to send him to prep school for a year instead of straight into college.
Communication. Imagine that.
And the tradition in this town is for the entire senior class to go to this one restaurant for their celebration, which is definitely a thing in small towns. Like,
and that's actually, not to cut you off, but that's something else from way earlier in the book. We have one scene in the bar with the lightning rod salesman, 200 pages before it ever matters.
Yes. Did we need to know that? Like, was that scene necessary? Because all you needed to have was like him being like, "That's weird. I didn't see any lightning rods." That's what Chuck's dad says on the way out, and I'm like,
I guess it sticks. The scene does stick out. Like, you get the when they mention lightning rods again, you go like, "Oh yeah, lightning rods. There was a thing about that from way back when." And I guess in some ways that sort of plays into the same way that I guess it plays into the themes of the book in some ways, but there's probably another way to do that didn't require an entire chapter.
Yeah. Because until you brought it up, I'd completely forgotten about it. So, but yeah, he touches Chuck like when they're hugging, Chuck's thanking him for helping him out, and he gets a flash of this horrific fire with bodies piled up by the exits, and he knows that it's caused by lightning, and he's just adamant that you cannot let your son go to this restaurant. Do not do this. I don't know what I need to say to you, but I'm not going to like be sitting here impotent and watch him go. I will fucking lock him in my bedroom if I have to do. Like, he's really serious about it. And while Chuck's dad does not believe him, he's like, all right, you know what? If it'll make you feel better, like you've done a lot for my kid, we'll just do something cool at home. That's fine, you know? And they go to the restaurant and try and convince the owner. And later, his father is like, if I had just believed you, I could have convinced this owner to dispense with the whole thing by paying him outright for the upfront expenses that he had put into this party. And then nobody else would have gotten hurt. But as it is, it's like Chuck and a few of his close friends are at his house, and it's the rest of the senior class at this fucking event. It's like, what do they say, like 70 people?
It was a lot of the senior class. And,
like, I can't imagine a tragedy like in a small town. Like, that's a whole generation almost, like, wiped out, you know? Some of them survived and made it out, but most
and I love
didn't. Like,
when, you know, there's this whole thing hanging over the night of, okay, Mr. Psychic, clearly nothing's happened. You know, everything's fine. It's 2 a.m. now. Still nothing has happened. And then it finally happens. And the first vocal reaction you hear is from Chuck's girlfriend, who says, he caused this to happen. Which I totally can see that logic, as, you know, ridiculous as it is. And that's exactly what would happen, is they'd say, like, well, now that you've seen it, it has to happen. So clearly you're causing these things. And I don't know, something about it just really spoke to me as a true reaction, as insane as that is.
That's true. It is, like, it's so infuriating to me that I want to be like, what the, but yeah, people are infuriating. So, but I do like the fact that, like, both Chuck and his dad are like, will you shut the fuck up? What is wrong with you? Like, they are not listening to her shit for a second.
But
so
I do like that that's the very first reaction. It's not, oh my God, thank you.
Exactly.
It is, you did this. Burn the witch. Now, I do want to rewind, because that takes place after the murderer and after all that stuff. So before he goes to be a tutor, he's in Maine, he's hanging out at his house, he's doing nothing. He meets with Sarah again, and he meets her son. They let him go and nap and play and whatever, and then they go sleep together in the barn. Which I sort of get, but I never entirely knew how to feel about. Because I get that, like, you know, they're the lost love and the thing that could have been, and this was the night we were supposed to have. I still feel a little weird about it. And I don't know. I just, and again, I think if she was a bigger part of the rest of the story, that would, maybe I would have different feelings on it, but it just feels so odd in the middle of everything else.
Yeah, I had a few, like, so...
I did.
Did you read It? Do you remember the scene between Bill Denbrough and what's-her-face when they're adults and they meet up? And, like...
Yeah.
She's married to an abusive asshole, so he's irrelevant to me, like... But she is married, but whatever. And he is married also to a woman who's awesome. Like, we meet her and she's great. And the two of them get together and just have an affair. And it's like this sort of matter of course. It's treated as if, well, you know, we always meant to have sex. So we kind of get a pass for this. And I'm like,
I forgot about that scene, but you're right. It is kind of the same thing. And there's nothing inevitable about this. And, I mean, I guess if it gives you some form of personal closure, that's fine. But at the same time, it's not fine. It's weird, and it's awkward, and it's in a hay pile in a barn. That just feels uncomfortable to me.
And also, it's in the loft of the barn, which he has just like undergone extensive physical therapy, and climbing a ladder and
really
having sex like doesn't sound like a thing that he should be able to do. That kind of bothered me that it's not even really addressed how like he's a little frail still, and they're supposed to be just banging away like more than once that afternoon. And I'm like, I don't know that this guy could handle that, frankly. Yeah, and again, but okay, I guess we're supposed to believe it. Oh, yeah, and Jesse's mentioning with her baby on the porch or something. They just leave the kid out there.
Different time.
Yeah.
Different time. Apparently that was okay.
I guess. And then there's like the, after they have sex, she comes in the house and they have dinner together. And John's wondering if his dad knows, and realizes that he's kind of doing the same thing that John's doing, which is playing house for one day and pretending everything is okay. And I got like my son married this girl and had a kid, and this is my grandson, and it's a play pretend for like an afternoon and evening, which is super heartbreaking. Like that part really like pulled at the heartstrings for me. I felt myself tearing up in the car while I was listening to
there's that whole
part.
Sense of, again, the life that he should have had. And I mean, I guess if your book is about this character, then it makes sense to kind of harp on that, but it just sucks. It just really, really sucks, and they never let you forget how much it sucks.
Yeah, definitely.
So that happens. She leaves. They don't see each other again for years. They do. Then the murder thing happens, and I don't know how much there is to talk about that necessarily. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. It's
interesting, I guess. John's crawling around on his hands and knees in the park in front of a bunch of reporters. And
and he starts talking in the guy's voice. This was a part of his power that I felt a little weird about, because when he's demonstrating to the doctor with the photo of the guy's mother, it's he starts to like sing a Polish lullaby. Then when he does the demonstration for the reporter, he starts speaking in the reporter's little sister's voice. And then, this is when he starts, like, he becomes a different person. And I like that the sheriff, like, it's not acting. Like, the sheriff sees a complete change in him and, like, takes several steps back and is like, the fuck is this? And it leads to this conversation with John being like, so I know who it is. And tells him the name, literally the name of the murderer, to which the sheriff is like, nah.
Oh, all right. Sorry. Yeah. That's
the end of the sentence. Just nah.
But yeah.
Nope. He's just like, this is somebody that he knows and trusts, and he is not here for it. He's not hearing it.
It was, but Johnny's totally logical. It's like, okay, if it's not him, then let's go check out his house. If it's not him, let's go take a look at this stuff. And clearly this is going to prove that I'm wrong. Again, with him, it is no longer a matter of I have to convince you. It's like, no, I know this is the truth. I'm telling you it's the truth. You do what you want with that information. Because he doesn't want to be there. He really is just guilted into going and doing this thing. And we get the scene of the guy and his mother and the clothespin and just all the weird nastiness that goes into King serial killers.
Yeah. I really like the fact that we get the detail that his mother knew. I wasn't expecting that. And there's something so extra fucked up about the fact that she was aware and he came home and told her, like, what kind of the relationship just got exponentially weirder in that fraction of a second when Johnny says, you knew? And I was like, what? Yeah. So, that was a pretty good reveal there. Because, we already know that this guy's the murderer. Like, we've been in his POV, but he still packed a surprise in there.
Yeah, it's a good scene. I don't know how much there's to say about it necessarily, but it's a good little part of the book. And it puts Johnny back in the national spotlight again. Except he's got his National Enquirer, Weekly World News sort of foils spreading lies about him and driving him further and further.
Right. And the murderer...
I forget his name. He's the
what's
deputy.
What's the murderer's name again?
But I'm forgetting
it doesn't really matter. But he winds up cutting his own throat to commit suicide, which is like the worst way in the world to kill yourself. Like, the only thing that I think is worse, I think Elliot Smith stabbed himself in the heart, which is, I mean, Frank Dodd, thank you, Sal. But yeah, I just, that, and he also wrote, I confess, on this note that he was holding so like, he knew when he saw Johnny appear on the scene that he was being consulted, apparently he had faith in Johnny. Like, he knew this is it, which is interesting. I wonder why he was so sure that he was getting found out. If there's like, when Johnny speaks like him and sort of takes over, does he feel it happen? Because when Johnny is channeling the other people, the mother is on the other side of the country, so we don't really know about her, and the little sister is dead. So I'm super curious, like, is there a sort of pull that you feel like when he touches you?
And here's the interesting thing about that too,
interested to know more
because
about that.
The dead zone, like, they refer to a couple different things as the dead zone over the course of the book. Like, one is just the area of his brain that's not firing exactly right, but the other one is he sees these visions, but he doesn't see everything.
Right.
There's pieces of everything that are missing. So this guy could have very well, like, seen Johnny being brought in and says, like, oh my God, the jig is up. There was no guarantee that Johnny, he could see everything, but still not actually know who the guy is. And I think that's one of the other things I like so much about the psychic piece, is that you only get little bits of it. He can see maybe even like 80% of a picture, but just not enough to know everything. Just enough to know some important piece of information. It's kind of, did you watch Person of Interest? The TV show that was on Fox for a couple seasons? That was kind of the same thing, where they developed a computer program that could tell you, like, it could point to a person and let you know they were either going to commit a crime or be the victim of a crime, but couldn't tell you any other information than that. And so the main character is running around with these people trying to figure out why the computer grabbed them. And I feel like the Dead Zone power is a little bit like that. It tells you just enough information as to what you need to know, but not enough to actually proceed in any kind of clarity. No?
I'm not sure I agree with that. I was actually surprised at the amount of clarity he had on things. Like, he's like, this is the restaurant everybody's going to. It's a graduation party. It gets struck by lightning. There are bodies piled by the doors. This is what time it happened. Like, he knows everything that's going to happen there. When he has the photo for Sam's mom, he's like, she got blown into a nearby building, and she assumed that you were dead, and she had amnesia. And then she came out of the amnesia around this time, but she had remarried, and she had 3 kids, and then she moved to San Francisco.
That's true.
She lives
That's
on
true.
Carmel Avenue.
That is true.
Like,
that is true. But then he'll get Gregg Stilson.
Lot.
He shakes his hand, and he sees World War III happen, and he sees Gregg Stilson as the president, but he doesn't actually know how he got from point A to point B. He just knows that it's going to happen, and he needs to do something to stop that. But that's true. There are times when he seems to know absolutely everything. But I feel like there are other places where, when the physical therapist in the hospital, is working on him, and suddenly he realizes that the stove is on. And he knows enough to know, like, the stove is on, you've got to go home, but there are still pieces where he's not totally clear on exactly what it was he saw. He just knows enough to tell her, you left the stove on, go take care of it. It's still bits of it are foggy for him. No, am I wrong on that?
No, that scene too. He says you left the tea towel too close to the burner, and
you're right.
He
does say that.
Lit the curtains on fire. Like. Yeah, he knows exactly how that whole thing went down, and like how much damage there's going to be depending on how long she waits to call the fire department.
Yeah, all right. I
don't know, Alan.
I very well could.
I think you're wrong on that one. I think Stilson's like the one exception, honestly, in that he doesn't see as much with him as he does with everybody else. And I'm wondering if it's just because of the scope of what he's seeing. Everything else that he sees is a real personal moment, but that's like involving the entire world, the fate of the world. It sounds like
that would make sense.
So maybe that's part of it.
But let's talk about Stilson a little bit, because aside from that first scene, we haven't really gotten there. We get interspersed scenes of Gregg Stilson climbing the ranks, and we see his rise to power, like, locally, where he actually seems to be doing some things that are kind of cool, like policies that seem like, wow, these are actually really good policies that, would have a lot of use. But he's also doing things like scaring the crap out of people in his office when nobody is looking, and lighting things on fire, and restraining himself from beating people into bloody pulps, and hiring biker gangs to be his enforcement. And
with broken
and I love
pool
that
cues.
he isn't just like, he's not Snidely Whiplash twirling his mustache in every single scene. He's got this, again, this psychosis that is eventually going to cause massive problems. But I do love that he actually has like policies that the book is able to speak to, and things he's implemented that actually make it seem like somebody might want to have an office, and things that they might be cheering on and want to see this guy proceed. He isn't just a nut with a bunch of hot dogs.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I mean, as you were saying, with the climate that we're in right now, it's a really alarming series of events, because this guy doesn't have the background in politics that would be expected. He didn't go to school for this stuff. He doesn't come from a wealthy, well-educated family. So in that respect, we're obviously making this comparison to Donald Trump. He's a very different guy than Trump based on his background. However, his appeal is still very similar in that, well, he's not from Washington. He's not one of those guys, which, like, yes, spoiler alert, Trump is definitely one of those guys. What is wrong with you? But that's the narrative that they decide to go with, is like, he's from the outside and he's going to fix things with the common man in mind, with the common sense of the common man, and not with the same old politics bullshit. And he seems to be kind of coming through on a lot of those promises versus Donald Trump, who has done jack all.
Yes.
But then there's the rally, the one that we have John go to, where he's watching people get into this frenzy.
Yeah, like the
that
rapture.
Is straight up frightening for him. Like, he has a sense. Yeah, right? Exactly. That's a good word. Rapture. And he has a sense of Stillson before he touches him. Like, he's watching the TV and just like, there's something about this that I don't like. But he can't put his finger on it until he literally puts his finger on it. Lol. And that fucking thing that he sees, like you were talking about, before he goes there, he watches a rally where Gregg just throws hot dogs into the audience, which is the most bizarre, unsanitary, and not at all appealing thing I've ever heard. Like, really? Do you want that? Do people want hot dogs thrown at them? Is that... okay. But apparently, like, and I'll have you saying hot dog, and I'm like,
but
that doesn't even mean anything. But apparently, he says that he wants to send the pollution to the moon. I love that whole part. Like, he just says outlandish shit that is impossible, and everybody has to know it's impossible. But they don't care whether it's possible. They care that this guy is willing to say bizarre shit that they'd say to their friends at a bar.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's like enough for them, So yeah, this like slavish devotion they all have.
And
to
I
him
love
after
that you
such
get to
short
see
time. It's like real
the crowd.
scary.
It acts like a monolith in one sense, but then you've got the people who are able to cheer on like his little political things. You've got the people who are, again, there's like that cult of personality. I'm enraptured by your presence and I'm fighting to get to you so I can shake your hand. And then there are the people who just think this whole thing is hilarious and I'm going to vote for this guy anyway because wouldn't that be funny? And where have we seen that,
Yep. The people who just think there's no way anybody's going to take this guy seriously. Like, it's fine. We'll just let him play out like the clown he is, and who cares?
And I love that he doesn't come out of nowhere. I do like, with all the meandering that the book does, that I feel like Johnny maybe eventually would have gotten to a place of helping people, because he does start to take an interest in politicians. And before he gets to Stillson, we do get this sequence of him, as long as he's in New Hampshire, let's go see all the presidential candidates that want to come and see who he can run into at the diners. And he gets all of these little flashes of who these people are going to be and what they're good at and what they're not. And that just seems like a thing you would do if you knew you could shake someone's hand and see the future, or at least get like a true and honest sense of them. Yeah, why wouldn't you go do that? And it gets there very organically. Again, maybe even a little too organically. But I love how they arrive at that place. And then so when he gets to shake Stilson's hand, it isn't out of the ordinary other than this guy's a nut bar. And I gotta see. And so, then the book finally finds its plot when he shakes his hand and realizes this guy is going to cause World War III.
Right.
And this sends Johnny down an even darker, even more vicious spiral of, pieces of paper connected by red string as he tries to figure out what he could possibly do to avoid this thing that he has seen.
What he can do to avoid it without killing him, because he just can't seem to abide the fact that killing him is probably the only option. And as we find out, it's not the only option, but the threat of killing him has to be very real, apparently. Because there's other things that you could maybe try and out him with, but you'd have to have the support of the people that this dude has total control over, because he's blackmailing practically everybody. So nobody's going to turn on him at this point. So he winds up coming to he tells himself, I have plenty of time to figure this out. And then we find out at the end of the book, but it's pretty clearly implied that he figures out he's got an expiration date on his life, that there is something going on. And I figured it was some kind of cancer. And I figured because of the nature of all of his injuries, it had to be brain cancer. And he has to pick up the pace on his whole plan and do it sooner than he expected to. And because of that, he really can only come up with assassination. That's all he's got.
You haven't read 11/22/63, have you? It's definitely one of the King's better books that have come out in the last 10 years. And it's essentially the last third of the Dead Zone, except it's 800 pages long, of a portal that brings you back to 1958 and this guy who goes back to try and prevent the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And it's reading that book really gave me flashes of the Dead Zone. So he did this already. And it involved psychics and was very different. But I like you said, that he doesn't want to kill this guy necessarily. It's on there as an option on the table because, of course, it would have to be. But he really tries to think of anything else that might possibly work. And he's able to kind of go through those ideas of this one, there's just nothing that is certain enough. And you have to be certain because this guy is dangerous in ways that people aren't expecting. Not unlike our current president.
Right.
And as Jesse points out, full circle, James Franco stars in 11/22/63, the Hulu adaptation.
Weird.
So.
Okay. And you had mentioned comparing this to somebody going back in time and killing Hitler, and you would just be the weirdo
You'd be like
that killed a small-time politician for no good reason. But if you went back in time, you could at least maybe have on you a couple of headlines, actual printed newspapers, so that even if nobody really believed it, there would be a little element of holy shit, I wonder about that though. In this case, there's no possibility of any explanation whatsoever beyond, well, he's psychic. You heard about this guy,
right? Which
is clearly not going to be enough for almost anybody. And so let's jump ahead. He winds up going to this rally and spends the night in a service closet in order to have a good spot. It's pretty brutal because he's really sick by this point and having a hard time keeping it together. And there's feedback from the speakers and stuff. And he's got this horrific headache, and the feedback, he almost screams when it happens, gives himself
really
away,
well.
Yikes.
He does a really good job of just...
Yeah, he does.
Putting you
That's
in
actually really true.
Yeah, and just that's got to be one of the most common awful things that people have in common is we all know what it's like to have just a vicious headache. And he is able to invoke that so well.
I hope everybody knows.
I was just going to say the same thing. I'd be very pissed if there's someone out there who doesn't know what that's like. That's not fair. But yeah, the whole ending of this book and the drive towards it, and I love that they, he jumps ahead, and it's a Stephen King thing, but he jumps ahead to talk to the people who saw John Smith on that day before you even necessarily know what happens that day.
Right.
And let me ask, how were you feeling about the book at this point? Where could you figure out where this was going or how this was going to end?
By the time he hides out, or by the time he actually
I guess that whole drive in this last portion of the book to get there, because one of the things that really worked about this ending, this climax for me, is that it doesn't go the way that he wants it to go. And as the reader, I'm saying he can't possibly end with this guy still alive, but it's almost like, I gotta shoot him. I gotta shoot him. I gotta shoot him. I shot him. That's a crappy ending. So something else has got to happen. What's it going to be? And that kept me really invested going through this book the first time.
Yeah, I think that, I was invested, but once we get to the point where he's, finding his spot and going to spend the night, it took too long. This is the part where I felt like I had gone through a lot and been very patient through much of the book. And we're finally getting to the point that I want to go. And I have to hear about his whole plan for getting into the building and every agonizing moment spent in overnight and setting up the thing the next day. And the old biddies who come and sit down first. And as this crowd slowly comes in, and are they going to check all the rooms? And oh my God, they almost open this door, but then they don't. I was just starting to be like, oh my God, dude, you need to do this. You've got to stop with this. Is ridiculous. Once he gets to the point where Johnny's actually aiming the gun and people start to flip out, I thought that was really well done. It was just the lead up to it that just felt interminable. And then, as you say, I assume it can't go to plan. So that's part of my impatience, was just, I know this isn't going to work out. So just tell me how it doesn't work out, because I'm dying. What is it? What goes wrong? And I almost wondered if he was going to have it end that Johnny doesn't succeed, period. That entered my head a few times. What if it's just a bummer ending with I tried and failed because I saw the future and I don't get to change it. Maybe that's going to be the moral of it, is that when I see it, it's true. End of story. Because that's really this is him touching this guy is it's only the second time that Johnny's ever seen the future specifically. Everything else, it's been seeing into somebody's past or seeing into what's happening right now from a different angle. But the fire is the first time that ever happens. Is really
when he wakes up,
something.
He predicts the eye surgery.
He manages to keep Chuck from
something that's going to happen. And the battery when he's a little kid.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So it does happen a couple times.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. So, yeah, I guess I was just kind of not sure how King wanted to play that. If he was going to have it be inevitable or something that you can alter. And I like the fact that it turns out that when John touches him at the very end, he can tell it's different. So he can change it, and he can tell that he's changed it, which is a really interesting, but, well, what winds up happening is that when he aims at this guy, everybody clears out. People are flipping out. His biker bodyguards all pull out guns and are coming at him and wind up nailing him a couple places. And Gregg Stilson
uses him as a human shield.
He grabs this woman's son and holds him up as a human shield. Which, I have to be honest, I don't think would be enough to derail somebody's career today. The things that people have gotten away with the past 2 years that have been proven, publicized, and yet they're still going. I think in the world that Stephen King wrote this, it's absolutely enough. I'm not convinced it would be today in 2018. That's where my faith in humanity is. But is a lucky moment because he does that, and there's that like amateur photographer wannabe taking the photos, and they try and chase this guy down and smash his camera, and he just manages to and he manages to be fleet of foot enough to escape, and that is what goes up in the papers, and everybody is like, wow, what a piece of shit. Total scumbag. And it essentially ends his career. And I love, like, when they're interviewing the photographer, he's just like, well, you know, I guess I'm going to be rich. That's pretty cool. Like, he's just, like, really not concerned about the overall, like, story that's happening here or the impact he's having. He's just like, oh,
that same
really
sort of
lucky
80s
with that one,
Reaganite mentality
Jesus,
of,
dude.
you know, yeah, I'm getting ahead. Good for me.
Yep.
Yeah, and I really love that climax. Like I said, I think because it was unexpected, and Johnny succeeds, but not in the way that he expected to. I did feel this time, and I don't remember feeling that way in the past. Mm-hmm. Again, the audiobook probably had a lot to do with it. The climax happens. I think the climax is great. And then the book has, like, a whole other section after where we have to check in with literally everybody before it actually ends. And that felt really, really unnecessary to me. And I never felt that way before. But it definitely, again, goes on just a little too long, and they probably could have done that in a much more compact and satisfying way.
I think what bothered me about it is that, like, because what King does is he has that moment, he's lifting up the kid, there's all this yelling, and then John, like, touches him and realizes it's changed, and then I did it, and then he falls and dies. And then it cuts right from there to this court scene, and it's supposed, like, it feels like King wants it to be suspenseful and, like, this big revelation that he has this tumor and that this is the thing that wound up ending this guy's career. And but, like, we already kind of figured that out already. So he's drawing this out as if it's a big climactic, surprising conclusion, and it's not. We're not idiots. We know what you're doing. Like, you've been very obvious about it. I didn't think you were trying to keep it a secret, really. And so, yeah, if this had been really a cutaway before John touched him and was like, oh, I succeeded, and he dies, if he had cut out before that, maybe I would have been like, all right, I'm here. What are you doing? But he shows us the succeeding of it and then tries to, like, backtrack and make it, did he succeed? And I'm like, we know.
And he has the letters to Sarah and to his dad that I don't really think we ever need to know what's in those. I really don't think that that's important at all. You know, this is the end of Rocky. No. You go out on him and Adrian in the ring. You don't need the scene afterwards. It's...
Yeah, I was really surprised that we get to see, and it's nothing that you wouldn't have expected to be in the letters either. If there was some huge revelation there, but no, it's just exactly what you'd expect, an explanation, and then I love you, you know, like, well, all right. So I figured. So yeah, I definitely
really
agree with you in terms of how, like, the very end is
handled. The story doesn't just end with him dead on the floor of the town hall or wherever it was. So I was disappointed by that. And, you know, I guess that is just, I've been rereading a lot of King over the last 2-3 years, and I know you have too, that this is just a thing he does, and it's inescapable.
Yeah. He just doesn't know when to get out of his own way. Like, he's got amazing ideas, and when he zeroes in on things, he does them really well. But he doesn't generally know how to zero in. It's... when he does it, he's so good, but it's just really, like, over-explaining. So that was, I think, in the book club group I wrote, like, well, that ended with kind of a whimper, because it just didn't feel necessary, as you put it. Yeah, so I would agree with you on that. I'm really curious, though, what the hell happens to Gregg Stilson, because I'm not seeing a good outcome for anybody that gets in his way for the next 10 years. Like, there goes a guy who had everything in the palm of his hand. It gets ripped away, and he's left with what?
Right.
And he never even psycho.
He never even like achieved a high enough level where he would be like a like on the talk show circuit or something like that. And I don't know that he's stable enough for people to want to hire him as like a political consultant, because I could see people saying like, okay, yeah, that ended disastrously, but right up until then, that guy had something. We need to get him working on our campaign and show us how to make this guy somebody, the next Gregg Stilson. But I can't imagine that ending very well either, because everyone who's working for him knows he's nuts. If you're that close to him.
And they all hate him, but he does still have leverage because he has like photos and like he's blackmailing everybody. So he still has that. And I don't know what happens with that then, like, does he blow up a bunch of other people's careers just out of fucking rage? He might. Why not? And I also like the fact that it ends this way because all of us have talked about the fact that if Trump were to be assassinated, he'd be a martyr. And it would just really like undermine all of the damage that he's done to treat him like somebody who has
struck down in his prime,
who was himself treated so unfairly. And it's like, exactly. Right. So while the idea of no Trump ever again is very enticing, that method never has been something that I thought like deserved any thought whatsoever. Murder is wrong. But that aside, and the fact that he manages to have Gregg screw himself is, I think, really important. It's not on Johnny. Like, yes, Johnny still attempted to kill him and whatnot, but it turns out to be, in the end,
far more
Gregg
satisfying.
Just undoes everything with just this one really rash move. Yeah, definitely. So in that sense, it is satisfying for that little bit. But yeah, I'm real curious what if King like thought at all about.
Yeah,
where
I
Stilson
really
goes
feel like
from
if
here,
nothing else,
what he would say to that.
He winds up, moving across the country, and he's back. Maybe he's not selling Bibles, but he's back to selling something door to door. I feel like this is a guy who is always going to have a con. He's always going to have a smile that's going to get people to want to, be around him. And, he'll have a couple of rough years. I think there's always got to be something going on with him. I think there's always going to be a plan and always going to be a scheme. But this was obviously his shot. And even he didn't know he was going to end up causing World War III. But, I think he's definitely somebody. Honestly, he's somebody that I could see, like he could go David Koresh the whole thing and, be at the center of some weird cult. And, somebody who he needs other people to follow him, and he needs to have absolute control over whatever it is he's in the middle of. So he winds up somewhere in there. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it.
I'm sure wherever he winds up, there's some more dead dogs turning up. Neighborhood cats disappearing. Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything you want to add? I
really feel like we've covered a lot of it. I still really like this book. I still think a lot of the major set pieces of this book work really well. And I think it's a book that is, it was a #1 bestseller. So it's not like it's underrated in that sense, but I think it's one of the King books that people forget about. And I really, really enjoy it. It is also one of the things, I read an interview with him where he said it was the only book he'd written where he had the end in mind when he started the book. He knew exactly where he wanted this book to end. And I find that to be a really interesting way just to look at a lens to look at the structure of the book, because it seems like he knew where he wanted to get to and he had no idea how he could get the guy there. So he has him dick around in Maine for a while and then dick around in New Hampshire for a while. Yeah. And then eventually he stumbles into Gregg Stilson. Like, I find that to be really intriguing, that he knew where he wanted this book to end and he actually tried to work backwards, and that's not something Stephen King ever does. But yeah, I said I'm really glad I got to reread it. I definitely had some new thoughts on it this time. But sorry, I keep staring at the book instead of the camera. But oh, all right. Well, then you can cut that out.
Oh, I can't tell, to be honest. Yeah.
But I like this one a lot, and I'm glad I got to reread it for the show, and I'm glad I'm still finding new things to talk about with it too. So.
Yeah, that's always a gratifying thing, especially if you've read it as many times as you tell you read this. Like, to still be able to pull things out is always rewarding. All right. Well, thank you, sir, for guessing with me and doing this one for me.
Even if it's not, it's. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but what Stephen King is. So.
True. This is true. Yeah, I did enjoy it, though. I definitely would say that. And I want to say thanks to everybody who is in the chat as well. We have Sal, we have Tony, we have Candace, we have Asbjorn. Asbjorn? I hope I'm saying that right. And yeah, thank you guys all for coming and for your input. And if anybody is interested in what we are going to be doing next month, the book for October is going to be Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. That is the main book club book, and the childhood favorite book is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. So that's what's going to be coming up for October, my birthday month. So yeah, guys, thank you all so much again. Thank you, Alan. And I will see you next month, everybody. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.